cold billionaire walked into his kitchen and froze. His maid was dancing alone, free, joyful, like the world couldn't touch her. She didn't know he was watching, and what he did next would cost them both. The mansion was quiet, too quiet, not peaceful, not restful, the kind of silence that erased sound before it could grow, the kind that pressed down on the chest, the kind that felt less like calm and more like containment. Grace Holloway stood at the kitchen island, wiping marble countertops that never seemed to show fingerprints. Her movements were careful, practiced, precise. But her eyes carried a tiredness that didn't belong to someone her age, 26, and already familiar with loss. This house didn't ask questions. It didn't allow mistakes. It didn't notice people. The mansion belonged to Nathaniel Cross, the youngest real estate billionaire in the country, a man known for efficiency, silence, and control. He spoke only when necessary. He listened to no one. He trusted nothing he couldn't measure or manage. The house mirrored him perfectly. Clean, expensive, impressive, empty. He lived alone now, not because he wanted to, but because emptiness had become predictable. Once, this place had known laughter. Once, there had been voices that softened the walls. But grief had a way of freezing rooms, and Nathaniel had learned that belief was just another thing you could lose. Grace had worked here for 6 months. She arrived before sunrise. She left after dark. She cleaned rooms she was never invited to sit in. She moved quietly enough that no one noticed when she entered or left. Invisible was safer. Every morning, before the house woke, Grace knelt beside her bed. She didn't pray for more money. She didn't pray to be seen. She prayed for endurance, for strength that didn't depend on circumstances, for joy she didn't have to explain. That evening, the house emptied earlier than usual. The sun dropped low, spilling amber light across the kitchen floor. Nathaniel was scheduled to be downtown for hours. The staff had gone. Grace was alone, truly alone. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She pulled out her phone, scrolled once, and pressed play. The music was soft, familiar. A song she had learned long before this house. She closed her eyes. At first, she barely moved, just a shift of weight, a gentle sway. Then her shoulders loosened. Her hands lifted slightly. She picked up a wooden spoon from the counter without thinking, holding it like a microphone, like a reminder that joy didn't need permission. She sang, not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly. Her voice filled the space in a way nothing else ever had. In that moment, she wasn't an employee. She wasn't unseen. She wasn't careful. She twirled once, her uniform flaring just enough to remind her she was still a person. A smile crossed her face, unguarded, unfiltered. She didn't hear the front door. She didn't hear the footsteps. She didn't see Nathaniel Cross stop in the doorway. He had come home early. The meeting had collapsed. The driver had turned around. Nathaniel had expected the usual stillness. Instead, there was music. He slowed without meaning to. No one should have been there. The house didn't sound like this. Then he saw her. Grace, barefoot, singing, smiling, not performing, not pretending. Her eyes were closed, her head tilted slightly upward, like she was speaking to someone he hadn't addressed in years. She moved without fear, without calculation, without awareness of who might be watching. Nathaniel didn't move. Something tightened behind his ribs. Not anger, not irritation. Something unfamiliar. He stayed still long enough to feel it settle, long enough to realize it wasn't passing. Then Grace turned. The spoon slipped from her fingers and hit the counter. She froze. Her breath caught. Her face flushed. Her hands rushed to smooth her uniform as if she could rewind time. She had learned early that joy drew attention, and attention carried consequences in this house. "Mr. Cross," she said quickly, "I didn't know you were home. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" Nathaniel lifted one hand. Not sharp, not commanding, just still. "Don't," he said. She blinked. "Don't what?" "Stop." The word surprised both of them. She stared at him, unsure whether she'd heard correctly. "You were—" He paused, searching for language he hadn't needed in years. "You were doing something real." Her heart raced. She didn't understand his tone, or his expression, or why he hadn't turned away yet. Nathaniel stepped inside the kitchen, slowly. "I've never seen anyone look like that in this house," he said. Grace swallowed. "I'll go change. I'll get back to work." "You don't need to." The words stayed suspended between them. Nathaniel didn't step closer. He didn't reach for her. He simply looked at her like she wasn't part of the furniture anymore. "What do you call it?" he asked. "Call what?" "That?" He gestured gently. "Whatever that was." Grace hesitated. "Freedom." The word landed heavier than she expected. Nathaniel repeated it quietly. "Free." Neither of them spoke after that, but something had shifted, and neither of them knew yet what it would cost. The next morning, Nathaniel stared at a contract he couldn't focus on. Meetings passed, calls went unanswered. All he could see was a kitchen that didn't feel empty anymore. The peace disturbed him. That evening, he returned home early again. The kitchen was spotless, silent, lifeless. He moved through the house until he heard a voice, praying. He stopped outside the laundry room. "I don't know why you have me here," Grace whispered, "but I trust you. I trust that you see me." Nathaniel didn't move. "I'm not asking to be noticed," she continued. "I just need strength to keep going." Her voice didn't sound desperate. It sounded anchored. Nathaniel felt something hollow echo in his chest. That night, he didn't sleep. He remembered a hospital room, a small hand in his, a prayer that never got answered the way he expected. He remembered deciding that belief was a liability, but standing in that hallway, listening to Grace pray, he felt something unsettling. Not hope. Possibility. And possibility was dangerous. The next morning, he said her name out loud for the first time. "Grace." She turned, startled. "Yes, sir." "What you sing, do you believe it?" "Yes. Even here. Especially here." The answer stayed with him. That night, Nathaniel stood alone in the kitchen. The same spot. The same silence. He whispered one word. "God." It came out like a question. He didn't know if anyone was listening. But for the first time in 15 years, he didn't stop himself from speaking. And somewhere in the stillness, something long closed shifted open. Not wide, just enough. Enough to let light in. If this story matters to you, subscribe now for more stories. Like, share, and comment where in the world you're reading from. The change in Nathaniel didn't go unnoticed. His head of staff, Margaret Stone, had worked in the mansion for 12 years. She was efficient, sharp-tongued, and fiercely protective of the household's reputation. She ran the estate like a military operation. Every rule followed, every boundary maintained, every person kept in their proper place. And lately, she had been watching Mr. Cross very carefully. He had been coming home early, lingering in common areas, asking questions about the staff, and worst of all, he had been speaking to the maid. Not just instructions, actual conversation. Margaret didn't like it. On Thursday morning, she found Grace in the pantry, restocking. Shelves with imported olive oils and organic grains that cost more than Grace made in a week. "Grace!" Margaret's voice was cold and clipped. Grace turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, ma'am? I need to speak with you." Grace followed her into the hallway, her stomach tightening with instinct. Something was wrong. Margaret crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. I don't know what you think you're doing, but it needs to stop. I'm sorry? Grace's voice was soft, confused. I don't understand. Don't play innocent with me. Margaret stepped closer, her tone dropping to a harsh whisper. I've seen the way Mr. Cross has been looking at you, the way you've been prancing around here like you belong. Grace's face flushed. I haven't done anything wrong. I just do my work. You're a maid, Grace, a servant. You clean. You stay quiet. You do not engage with Mr. Cross beyond what is necessary. Do you understand me? Grace's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. I've only ever answered his questions respectfully. I don't care what you think you've been doing. Margaret's eyes were sharp as glass. Men like Mr. Cross don't see people like you as anything more than temporary distractions. And I will not allow you to embarrass this household or yourself by forgetting your place. The words stung like a slap. Grace lowered her eyes, her throat tight. Yes, ma'am. Good. Margaret turned on her heel. And stay out of the main areas of the house unless you're actively cleaning them. I don't want to see you wandering. Grace stood alone in the hallway, her chest aching. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply existed, smiled, answered questions, and somehow that was too much. She walked slowly back to the pantry, closed the door behind her, and leaned against the wall. Her hands shook as she pressed them together. And then quietly, she prayed, God, I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I trust you. Help me stay kind. Help me not grow bitter. Help me remember that you see me, even when they don't. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears didn't change anything, but prayer did. Nathaniel was in his study when he heard raised voices downstairs. He stood from his desk and walked to the top of the staircase, listening. Margaret's voice echoed through the foyer, sharp and cutting. I don't care if it was an accident. This is unacceptable. Nathaniel descended the stairs quietly. In the entryway, Grace stood with her head bowed, holding a shattered vase in her hands. Crystal pieces glittered on the marble floor around her feet. Margaret stood over her like a judge delivering a sentence. Do you have any idea how much this cost? Margaret hissed. This was imported from Italy. Mr. Cross's late mother purchased it herself. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. You never mean to, do you? But somehow, you're always causing problems. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Grace bent down carefully, picking up the pieces with trembling hands. I'll replace it. I'll pay for it. You couldn't afford this vase if you worked here for 10 years, Margaret snapped. That was enough. Margaret, Nathaniel's voice cut through the room like a blade. Both women turned. Margaret straightened immediately, her expression shifting to professional calm. Mr. Cross, I was just handling... I heard. Nathaniel walked down the last few steps, his eyes never leaving Margaret's face. And I'll take it from here. Margaret blinked, surprised. Sir, with all due respect, this is a matter of household management. And this is my house. His tone was calm, steady, but there was steel beneath it, which means I decide what matters and what doesn't. He turned to Grace, who was still kneeling on the floor, hands full of broken crystal. Grace, are you hurt? She looked up, startled. No, sir, I'm fine. Good. He extended his hand. Then leave the vase. I'll have someone else clean it up. Grace hesitated, her eyes flickering to Margaret, who stood frozen in shock. Grace, Nathaniel said again, softer this time. It's all right. Stand up. Slowly, Grace set the pieces down and took his hand. He helped her to her feet, his grip firm and steady. Margaret's face flushed. Mr. Cross, I must insist. The vase was old, Nathaniel said, his voice cutting her off. It was fragile. Accidents happen. But, sir, and more importantly, Nathaniel continued, his gaze hardening, no one in this house will be spoken to the way you just spoke to her. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. She looked like she had been struck. Nathaniel took a step forward, his voice dropping but losing none of its power. Not in this house. Margaret's face went pale. I was simply maintaining order. Order is not the same as cruelty, Nathaniel said quietly, and respect is not optional. Not for anyone who works here. Do I make myself clear? Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, sir. Good. Nathaniel gestured toward the door. You're dismissed for the day. We'll speak tomorrow. Margaret's face burned with humiliation, but she didn't argue. She turned sharply and walked out, her heels clicking against the marble like gunfire. The door closed behind her. Nathaniel turned back to Grace, who stood trembling, her eyes wide with disbelief. Are you all right? He asked gently. Grace nodded, though her voice shook when she spoke. Yes, sir. Thank you. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. The words hung between them. Grace searched his face, looking for something. Anger, pity, expectation. But all she saw was sincerity. I'm sorry about your mother's vase, she whispered. Nathaniel shook his head. It's just a thing, Grace. Things break. He paused, his voice softening. People shouldn't. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly. Nathaniel stepped back, giving her space. Take the rest of the day off. Go rest. But the kitchen will still be here tomorrow. His tone left no room for argument. Go. Grace nodded slowly, her throat too tight to speak. She turned and walked toward the servants' quarters, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Nathaniel stood alone in the foyer, staring at the broken crystal scattered across the floor. For years, he had lived in this house without seeing the people who kept it running. He had signed their checks. He had nodded at their work, but he had never truly seen them, until Grace. And now, everything looked different. He knelt down and picked up one of the shards, holding it up to the light. It had been his mother's favorite vase. She used to fill it with fresh lilies every spring, but she was gone, and holding on to things wouldn't bring her back. Nathaniel set the piece down gently and stood. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't feel like a man who had lost everything. He felt like a man who was finally waking up. He walked to the kitchen, the same room where this had all started, and stood in the center of it. The house was quiet again, but this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like waiting. Nathaniel closed his eyes and whispered the words he had been too afraid to say for so long. God, I'm sorry. His voice broke. I thought you left me, but you didn't, did you? The tears came before he could stop them. I left you. And in that moment, alone in his empty kitchen, Nathaniel Cross fell to his knees and wept, not for what he had lost, but for what he was finally ready to find. The weeks that followed were different. Not dramatic, not sudden, just different. Nathaniel began coming down to the kitchen in the mornings before work. Not to give orders, not to inspect, just to be there. The first time it happened, Grace had been startled to find him sitting at the island with a cup of coffee, reading the news on his tablet. Good morning, sir, she had said quietly, unsure of what to do. He looked up and nodded. Good morning, Grace. That was all. But it was enough. By the second week, he started asking questions. Do you take tea or coffee? Tea, sir, with honey if we have it. We do. He made her a cup himself. She had stood frozen, watching the billionaire pour hot water over a tea bag like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sit, he said, gesturing to the stool across from him. Grace hesitated. I have work to... It can wait 5 minutes. So she sat, and they talked. Not about money, not about work, just small things, where she was from, what she liked to read, whether she missed home. Nathaniel listened in a way that made her feel like her words mattered, like she mattered. And slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. One evening, Grace was folding laundry in the sitting room when she heard Nathaniel's voice coming from his study. The door was slightly open. She paused, not meaning to eavesdrop, but his words were clear. God, I don't know if I'm doing this right, he said quietly. I don't know how to undo 15 years of running, but I'm here, I'm listening, and I'm asking, not for more success, not for more control, just for wisdom, just for clarity. Grace's hands stilled on the towel she was folding. He was praying, really praying. Her heart swelled, and she closed her eyes, whispering her own prayer. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for not giving up on him. She moved quietly down the hall, giving him his privacy. But something inside her shifted. She had been praying for strength to survive this place. She hadn't realized God was using her to redeem it. On Saturday morning, Nathaniel found Grace in the kitchen again. This time, she wasn't working. She was standing by the window with her phone in her hand, music playing softly from the speaker on the counter. The same worship song from weeks ago. Grace swayed gently, her eyes closed, lips moving in quiet prayer. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, watching. But this time, he didn't stay hidden. He stepped into the kitchen. Grace heard him and turned, her cheeks flushing. Mr. Cross, I'm sorry. I thought you were still upstairs. Don't apologize, he said softly. He walked over to the counter and turned the volume up just slightly. Grace blinked, confused. Nathaniel looked at her, his expression uncertain but open. Can I join you? Her breath caught. Sir? I don't know how to do this, he admitted, his voice vulnerable in a way she had never heard before. I don't know the steps. I don't even know if I remember how to let go. But I want to try. Grace's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. The music swelled softly, a gentle rhythm, a melody that spoke of freedom and surrender. Nathaniel took a breath and began to move. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't polished. His shoulders were stiff, his movements awkward, but he tried, and Grace smiled. She reached out her hand, and he took it. Together they swayed, not as employer and employee, not as billionaire and maid, just as two people learning to breathe again. Nathaniel closed his eyes, and for the first time in 15 years, he let himself feel joy without fear. Grace whispered, "You're doing great." He laughed, a real, full laugh, and shook his head. "I'm terrible at this." "No," she said gently. "You're just learning. And that's beautiful." Later that afternoon, Nathaniel called Grace into his study. She entered cautiously, her hands folded in front of her. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. She sat, her heart racing. Nathaniel leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Grace, I need to ask you something." "Yes, sir?" "Are you happy here?" The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure how to answer. Nathaniel continued, his voice gentle. "I don't mean happy as in content to survive. I mean happy, fulfilled. Do you feel like this is where you're supposed to be?" Grace's throat tightened. I'm grateful for the work, sir." "That's not what I asked." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know what else I would do. I don't have a degree. I don't have savings. This job keeps me alive." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "What if I told you that you don't have to just survive here anymore?" Grace looked up, confused. He slid a folder across the desk toward her. "I've been thinking a lot about purpose lately," he said, "about what it means to lead well, to live well. And I realized something. I've been managing an estate, but I haven't been building a home." Grace opened the folder. Inside was a new contract. Not for a maid, for a household coordinator, a real position with a real salary, benefits, and time off. Her hands trembled. "Mr. Cross, I don't understand." "You're not invisible, Grace," he said firmly. "You never were. I was just too blind to see you, but I see you now. And I'm asking, not telling, if you would consider staying. Not as someone I employ, but as someone I trust." Tears streamed down her face. "Why are you doing this?" Nathaniel's voice softened. "Because you reminded me what it feels like to be human, and I want to honor that." Grace wiped her eyes, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," he said. "And if you decide this isn't where you want to be, I'll help you find what is. No strings, no guilt, just choice." Grace looked at the man sitting across from her, the man who had been cold and distant just weeks ago, and saw something she never expected. Humility. "I'll stay," she whispered. "Not because I have to, but because I want to." Nathaniel smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Thank you." That evening, as the sun set and painted the mansion in shades of gold and amber, Nathaniel stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where everything had changed. Grace walked in, carrying a small potted plant, a peace lily she had bought from the market. "I thought the kitchen could use some life," she said, setting it on the windowsill. Nathaniel looked at the plant, then at her, and nodded. "It's perfect." They stood together in comfortable silence. And for the first time in 15 years, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a home. Grace glanced at Nathaniel. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I used to pray that God would just get me through each day in this place. I never thought he'd use me to change it." Nathaniel's voice was quiet but certain. "I used to think I lost God the day my mother died, but I didn't. I just stopped looking." He turned to her, his eyes clear. "You showed me where to find him again." Grace shook her head gently. "I didn't do anything special. I just danced." "No," Nathaniel said. "You did something I forgot how to do. You lived like you were loved, even when no one was watching." Grace smiled, her eyes shining. "Because I am loved, and so are you." Nathaniel felt something break, open inside him, not with pain, but with peace. He looked around the kitchen, the house, the life he had built on control and emptiness, and he realized something profound. Wealth had never saved him. Grace had. Not the woman, but the gift she carried, the grace of God, moving quietly through his life, waiting for him to notice, waiting for him to come home. God didn't knock loudly. He danced in the kitchen and waited to be seen.